While walking along a stretch of Caribbean beach in April, I suddenly stopped and I stared out at the turquoise ocean. I was smiling. My arms were outstretched. I twirled around like a girl with my toes brushing the water. No one else was around. I was like a wildflower shouting when it blossoms with no one around. That smile and that twirl happened so quickly, spontaneously, without a thought. I remember that moment well because something shifted in me. Only afterward did I recognize it as a defining moment, as a kind of snapshot in time. It was joy. I was on retreat at Shivananda Ashram in the Bahamas. Yes, an ashram in the Bahamas. What could be better? An ashram is a spiritual community modeled on traditional Hindu yogic practices. And there I was, twirling, smiling, for no reason and for every reason. The Sufi mystic, Rumi, had a profound understanding that kind of joy arises from the depths of our being when we do things from the soul. He wrote, "When you do things from your soul, you feel a river moving in you, a joy." Doing things from the soul is akin to Mr. Tiger going wild and feeling free to be himself, to put aside that top hat and all those proper manners. It has to do with giving voice to what lives inside us and connecting with our own true nature. As I was writing this sermon and finishing this sermon, actually, I learned about the death of Muhammad Ali. And I couldn't help but think about the many losses of cultural icons we've experienced this year. David Bowie, Prince, and now Muhammad Ali. These losses have hit us very hard, individually and collectively. These individuals changed the world and our lives. And something these three particular individuals had very much in common was the courage to be who they were. This really made them stand out from the crowd. They are models for us of what it means to be who we are. Unitarian Universalist minister Forrest Church was known for this saying, "Want what you have, do what you can, be who you are." It's good advice for all of us. It's also an odd thing to say, I think. Be who you are. Who else am I going to be? As Mathilde of Magdeburg said, each creature must live its own true nature. And to fail to do so is to fail to be truly alive. Who can we be but who we are? And yet, to give voice to one's own true nature turns out to be so much harder than it seems. From an early age, most individuals receive the message that life will go more smoothly if we find ways to be who we are within reason, within the boundaries of what culture, family, and even religious community tells us. Be who you are, but don't be too weird. While urged to follow our dreams, people are also too often simultaneously taught to be practical about it. When people go too far, too wild, even friends and family might lose patience and deem them peculiar and unacceptable, like Mr. Tiger. Messages abound about what kinds of homes, family, cars, and vacations are most desirable, and about how to dress, speak, think, believe, love, vote, and even which restroom to use. The much-needed conversation about transgender bathrooms illustrates a long-standing struggle to understand what it means to be transgender and to allow trans people to be who they are and stop pretending or denying the self. Cultural messages make everyone prone to be what Mark Nepo calls closet authentics, individuals who keep the truth of who they are under wraps. Forest Church called this faking our existence. Sometimes that truth of who we are just gets buried in the daily pressures we have, can get buried in our losses, in health issues, in financial concerns. It can also get confused by the roles that we hold. Who are we beyond a job title, or beyond being someone's spouse, or beyond our caretaking responsibilities? Who are we beyond, beneath all that? In March, I participated in a mindfulness meditation retreat. That retreat began with dinner, and it wasn't long before people started asking each other what they do for a living. When one woman asked me, I said, "How about if I tell you in a few days?" I got some quizzical looks, as you might imagine, and the people at the table, it seemed to me, we're starting to imagine my life as a double agent. The truth is, I wanted to know what it would be like just to be Sandra, without a professional label and without being seen through the lens of ministry. Believe me, people treat you differently when they find out you're a minister. Sometimes better, sometimes worse. Always interesting. Well, the remainder of the retreat was silent, and so I was freed from probing questions and welcomed the quiet. Everyone needs times like this. Everyone, whether it's at an ashram or in silence, times when they can step back and regroup, when they can retreat into the wilderness, metaphorically or literally, rediscovering and embracing their gifts, longings, and even limitations apart from other people's expectations. A sabbatical is an extended time for a minister to do this. Now, it might be nice to think that self-realization, that this process of knowing our true nature is something that we do once and then we're done. I think we tend to think that it's something that young people do, in those teenage years. They have an identity crisis and then they figure out who they are and then you just know. But it really doesn't work that way. In reality, we humans are always in a process of learning and relearning how to be who we are and do what we love. We forget, we stray, often from the very gifts that we knew when we were children. Even ministers can lose track and forget to live from the soul. That's why we all need that regular time for Sabbath, for spiritual practice. This process of relearning doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to radically change our whole lives. It doesn't mean that we want a new career, that we want to change our relationships or take up new hobbies or change our social circumstances. Sometimes it does mean that. But circumstances aren't always so dire, and sometimes people are already pursuing their dreams in many ways, but they just need a little time, a little focus to get back in touch with those original passions. I think of it as kind of like a good power washing for the soul. And that's been my sabbatical experience. I really felt I needed a good power washing of my soul, and that I got it also. Now, I want to say that there were times while I was on sabbatical that I questioned the value of spending so much time on myself and so much time on doing this power washing. That focus on the self can begin to feel a little narcissistic at times. But the spiritual inner work necessary to develop the self is anything but selfish. To know oneself is fundamental to being whole and being happy. It's also fundamental to being other-centered. To become more authentically oneself leads to service. If the focus on self does not lead to service, then it is more about ego and self-gratification. When a person discovers and rediscovers their own unique gifts, they also discover the kind of service they're uniquely equipped to offer. I think of the words of Parker Palmer, the Quaker educator, who said, as we grow into our authentic selfhood, we will not only find the joy that every human being seeks, we will also find our path of authentic service in the world. I mean, we only need to think of those luminaries I mentioned earlier, Prince, Bowie, Ali, as they followed their own. They came into deep service for all of us. I think especially of Ali, who risked boxing, his passion for something that was still greater for him, for justice, for rights. I am deeply grateful to all of you for making it possible for me to grow and rediscover my path. I've had time to go a little wild in my own way of going wild. During my sabbatical, I re-examined my own calling to ministry and my calling to this congregation, as well as other callings and passions. During that sabbatical time, I reaffirmed ministry as one of my primary paths of authentic service. In returning to this community, I feel very much that I am coming home to love. I am coming home to a renewed sense of my call to ministry and to the gifts that I believe I have to offer and the place where I feel called to delve even deeper. I want to end my sermon this morning by just naming some of those areas, what it means to me for our ministry. First, I very much want to refocus my energy on what I've covenanted with you, and that is to be your spiritual leader. To me, that means focusing my time and my energy more on theology and spirituality than on the business of church. Theology is, after all, a big part of what makes a religious community religious. And we Unitarian Universalists are inquisitive thinking people striving to make meaning of our lives and the world. This community has the potential to do more theological exploration beyond the sermon, beyond Sunday morning, beyond what we are already doing. Religious community is a place where we can do this, where we can examine our everyday lives and learn from each other. There's a lot to talk about, a lot we could be discussing, a lot we could be more curious about together. Things like the nature of evil, science and religion, God, the relevance of Unitarian Universalism in today's world. Is religion obsolete? What about angels? Sex, the possibilities and implications of life on other planets, the nature of consciousness. Do animals have spirits? I know what I think. I don't know what you might believe about that. We could talk about The Walking Dead. Why are we so fascinated with zombies anyway? And there is the Bible. Reincarnation, parenting, cosmology, the role of the church in social justice, and so much more. Second, this congregation is poised to wrestle with real difference. Our desire for unity too often gets in the way of our honest recognition of difference. To be a genuinely welcoming community takes a willingness to see ourselves and other people for who they are, and not to skim over or be afraid of those differences. We cannot show up as ourselves if others refuse to see us. Admitting to ourselves and each other that we don't always know how to do this, how to respond to differences of class, age, ability, sexual orientation, and race can and will be uncomfortable. That discomfort is not a failing. It's an indication of where there is room for us to grow and learn. This congregation's commitment to multiculturalism and anti-racism work currently being explored through the beloved Conversations group is helping to break down barriers around the issues of race and ethnicity. It's also a model for addressing and getting comfortable with other kinds of difference. Third, I would like us to learn to be more vulnerable with each other. That's a really scary one. As if the others weren't, right? How willing are we to take more risks and say things others may disagree with? Can we stand in our truth non-reactively? Can we listen, really listen to each other? Are we willing to make room for failure as well as success? Just imagine what it would be like for this community to celebrate our failures as holy experiments rather than awkward blunders to sweep under the table and forget about. Fourth and last, ministry is serious, vitally important, sometimes heartbreaking, often extraordinarily difficult, and joyful. Ministry done best is ministry done from the soul. If together we focus our community's energy on doing things from the soul, on discovering and offering our true selves in community, we will feel a river moving in us, a joy that will be a source of vitality and wholeness and love. And in those times when joy seems elusive, then maybe it's time for us to take a break, to breathe a little deeper, to break bread together. Nothing is more important than the sacred bonds of love and care that we hold for one another. I look forward to this next phase in the sacred journey of this congregation in the world. I look forward to us all coming more fully into the truth of our lives and into doing things from the soul in being who we are. May it be so. Amen. Blessed be.